Welcome to the Deconstructed Woman podcast, a podcast about breaking down barriers between women, exploring and sharing perspectives of each individual woman's experience, and discovering what we have in common and what makes us different. Hosted by Elisa Marie and Joji. Welcome back to the Deconstructed Woman podcast. Today, Joji and I wanted to kind of continue the conversation from our last episode or a couple back, depending on how we publish them. But we want to talk about what had come up in one of our conversations about anxieties when you go home and how you shift from maybe the typical roles that you have in your household, they change, or your interactions with your partner or spouse may shift when you kind of return to your hometown, return to visit relatives. It can look a lot of different ways, but I think Joji and I both agreed that for us, there is a certain level of anxiety that comes out of it, and I definitely have to be cognizant of how I'm acting, how I'm saying things, how I kind of fall back into those patterns. So, Joji, you had said that you actually found an article that spoke to this, which is kind of funny because we were just kind of talking off the cusp. But can you kind of tell us about that article and what you read?
Sure. So just to put it into context, Alyssa Marie and I are from Illinois is not our home state. So Alyssa Marie's from Ohio. I'm from Michigan. So we're from the Midwest. But this is really about when we leave our adult home and we travel back to our family home, maybe where we grew up, maybe just the town or the area, the house that we grew up in. So this article is from Spectrum News. It's from March 29th of this year, 2024. So it was published today. And it is called Being Home for the Holidays Can Create Hometown Anxiety. And hometown anxiety is not a diagnosis, but it is another form of stress, um, unease, discomfort, or even dread that you experience going to your hometown or back to your family of origin. And this was something that the Cleveland Clinic psychologist, Dr. Susan Albers, described. And she said, as soon as you step in the door, you may notice that you fall into old roles, patterns, communication, or family dynamics. And this definitely is something that I had not noticed until my husband brought it up to me. And he just sort of made a joke one day that I was every mile we get closer to Michigan, the more tense I get or the more wound up I get. And I didn't really notice that until he mentioned it. And now in the last 10 years, as I pay attention to it, I don't know why I feel that way. But really, as I get closer, and then I think it gets to full tilt when I'm 30 minutes away from my home, then it's like I start fast forwarding into what is it going to be like? Who's going to be there? What is all the things we have to do? And sometimes catastrophizing, sometimes not so much. But Alyssa, you said that you have some of the same kinds of thoughts that you're getting closer. What do yours really focus around?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting phenomenon. And so I think for me, I don't so much feel anxious. I mean, I get excited when I'm about 30 minutes out. It's a long drive for us, and it's probably multiple stops and we're just ready to get there. So I feel excited, but the minute I kind of walk in the door, what happens for me is I kind of fall into old patterns. I've always been like an overachiever, perfectionistic kind of child who always wanted to uh obtain like my parents' approval. And so I find myself quickly falling into that when I walk through the door where I'm just like, trying to get my kids to act a certain way, make sure, they get like the 30-minute pep talk before we get there of like, okay, guys, when we get there, like, you need to be quiet. You can't overwhelm Abuela and Grandpa. Like, you can't, can't get crazy. Um, ease into it. So really trying to like put on a show, if you will, because I feel like that's what is expected of me. So kind of in the same realm, maybe a little bit different, but I definitely feel that it doesn't feel like anxiety leading up to it, but definitely as soon as I walk through the door, there feels like a ton of pressures on me. And this kind of, I think, came up for, so the big holiday that I go home to my parents' house for is Christmas. And so, luckily that's behind us, and so I have a couple of quite a few months to kind of recoup before we try again. But it's always kind of that push or that pull to act a certain way, to present myself in a certain way because this is what is expected of me, and to be anything else would seem foreign.
And I remember now why this connected to our last conversation, because in our last conversation, I was talking about how my role has always been sort of the peacekeeper. And so when I am at home for the holidays or for whatever event I'm there for, I'm constantly negotiating between my family's expectations and my husband's expectations of what we're going to be doing. And the way that we function at home is somewhat different or very different than what we function when I go to visit my family. So in the sense that, we're pretty scheduled, we're pretty planful, we stick to our time frames. My family is very loosey goosey with things are starting on time, when they're ending, when we're eating dinner. And so that throws our whole plan for the day sort of up in the air for grabs. And that is very disorienting to my husband. It's just something I'm used to. And so if we say we're going to eat dinner at 6 and we don't eat dinner till 8 o'clock, I'm not overly concerned about it, but my husband is starving and he hasn't said anything and I haven't noticed. And so then it's sort of like, okay, I mean, I feel like it's my family. So if I want to go dig in the fridge for something to eat, I would do that. But he's not as comfortable in that space as I am. And that leads into something else, which I know has been, something that Dan and I have talked about is like he feels like he's being ignored. Like I am so swept up with my family and catching up and, whatever's going on that he's sort of left on the outside looking in. And what happens is I say, well, join in. Like you don't have to sit on the outside. Join in and be part of this family. You've been part of this family now for 20 years. So like jump in. And I'm not exactly sure what that looks like for him, but that's really hard for him to do. And so I try in the last 5 to 10 years, I've tried a lot harder to be more mindful of Dan and what he's going through and where he's at the moment so that he doesn't feel like, he's hanging out on his own and I'm completely removed and like re-enmeshed in my family. So that's one of the things that Dan and I have been working on. Does that resonate with you at all, Alyssa?
I definitely think so. I think we both talked about, like, my family's very loud. My father's Sicilian, my mother's Puerto Rican. It's a cultural mix of loud music, loud talking, lots of food. I mean, it's very different from what my husband kind of grew up with. And so he doesn't so much have a problem when we're in it because you're kind of just engulfed in that. But a lot of times I find him being like, okay, it's just too loud for me. Like, I'm gonna go for a walk, or, he definitely takes some quiet time during the trip. Um, so definitely differences in that realm. That I think, it's I think we've talked about in maybe another episode, but like the melting of two families and like traditions and things like that, but also just like culturally what that looks like, coming from a loud big family. I'm kind of used to, like, people talk loudly and we're just really passionate when we say things. We're not necessarily upset with each other. We might just say it in a more dramatic fashion. But a lot of times my husband's like, why are you arguing? And it's like, no, we're just talking. This is a discussion, but it's just getting loud. So I definitely think that I have to kind of be aware of that and make sure that, it's I don't know, it's hard to gauge it because it does just feel normal. It feels natural. It's what I've grown up with. But having another person come into that world also makes you a little self-conscious too of like, okay, you know, we can't wholly be just out and about and doing whatever because we do have to read it in at some point and make sure that we're, not being a bad example to our kids, for example. But um, I definitely think that that plays a role into it. And again, I feel very comfortable being that way with my family because we're all like that. But he's not. And so, yeah, I think that's maybe one example of how that plays out in our family.
So we also, my family is also large and loud. And so whenever we have like a major family holiday, typically if everybody gets together, there's at least 50 people there. And so that's a large number because now, we have the kids and the kids' kids and, extended family who's now joined us from India maybe or different states are now coming. And so it's a very big production. And then the volume just goes really high. And Dan will often say to me, "Why do you guys have to yell at each other? Like, why is everybody yelling and trying to talk louder than the other person?" And I think that when I get excited, I get really loud and then times that by 20 people. And we're all just like, to the outsider or the person who's not part of this family or part of growing up in a loud situation, I mean, it really feels like we are just trying to outdo each other with raising the volume. So that's definitely something we share. Alyssa, I also think to what you said too, I'm definitely a hero child. And so I do feel like I am also looking for approval from my family. And so I'm trying to make everybody happy. I'm trying to gloss over things. I'm trying to, just keep the peace and, do my social situation, go talk to everybody, make sure I acknowledge everybody, make sure I say goodbye to everybody. And that's the other thing that bothers Dan is like my goodbyes take forever because I do feel like I have to say goodbye to everybody, especially anybody who's older than me. And so those things and he thinks that I'm elongating the event. I'm like trying to make it a longer experience. And he just doesn't understand why I can't just like leave. And for me, that feels really disrespectful not to be able to not to say goodbye. But I don't know. It could just be me, but that's something that I really, really struggle with for sure. The other thing that adds to the loudness and the laughing and the craziness is alcohol flows pretty easily in my home. So like everybody drinks. And so it's sort of one of those things where that just adds to the party atmosphere and fun and loudness. But then also the way that we show love to each other in my family is that we pick at each other. And so like my brothers and I will be constantly putting each other down or, if we're talking about stories from the past, we're really picking out embarrassing stories to remind everybody and to like almost humiliate each other. But unfortunately, that's the way that we communicate or we talk or we connect with each other. And it's a very awkward way for my husband to try to figure out how to fit into this family because he doesn't know. And if he was to like make fun of me or make fun of my brothers, it probably just wouldn't land the same way. So it's just really an awkward kind of situation. And so I think that it's really hard to find a comfortable way to blend into this family when as the being the family of origin, being the person from this family of origin, I can get away with a lot. Whereas my husband saying something of the same nature probably wouldn't go over as well. And so I've never really thought about that and how he could just sort of like stand out like a sore thumb or something like that. And I've never thought of a situation where that's actually happened. But I could see that it may not feel the same way for him, and he might be a little hesitant to just jump in, and, be part of the gang.
Yeah, I definitely think it's funny because we started off talking about, like, hometown anxieties, and I think that I think that it's kind of it goes 2 ways because like, we feel some sort of way about going home, the expectations that are set for us, but also, like, that what we're discussing is our spouses have probably some anxieties related to, kind of entering into that atmosphere and environment as well. And so it's kind of a twofold thing. I think for us, uh, my husband and I really try to have a conversation and kind of a game plan for what that will look like when we get home. Like, okay, if I am getting really too dramatic or you know, because I never put him down or anything like that, but I definitely kind of I get a little bit more demanding, so I will acknowledge that on the air. So when he listens to this podcast sometime, he'll be like, "Yep, she said it." So I get a little bit more demanding just because of the fact that like, again, want everything to be a certain way. So I'll be like, "Okay, can you go get this? Can you go do this?" And so I have to be conscious of, "Hey, you don't have to ask him for everything, like, it's okay." Like, he's doing his own thing, but we kind of have come up with a game plan of, like, some code word or something that he can kind of say to me to say, "Hey, you're getting a little much. You're asking me to do a lot. I need a break," or something like that. And so, I mean, that's something that we have developed as a way to counteract that natural patterns that I just fall into, not consciously. Like, it's not a conscious effort to kind of be this, like, overbearing, demanding person, but that is just what comes out of my anxieties of being home. So I don't know if you can relate to that, but that's kind of how it pans out for us. So now what we're trying to do is actually counter that, limit that kind of behavior on my part so that everyone can enjoy themselves a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, my version of that is that I think I pander a lot to what my family wants, and I think Dan feels like when I'm at home, he's my priority or my daughter's my priority, but when I go home, then the 2 of them are on the sidelines, and I'm trying to figure out, like, what do my brothers want from me? What did my parents want from me? What do my in-laws want from me? What do my extended family want? And trying to make them fit into what other people's expectation is, even though, like I said, we don't usually start the day till noon. We usually try to end the day by like 9. Like by 9 o'clock, we like to be in the hotel room, unwinding, doing a little bit of what we do together before we end the day. But, when I'm at my family's house, if my family wants to go to somebody else's house at 9 o'clock at night, more than likely, if it was just me, I would be like, yeah, sure. You want to go over there? That's great. But knowing that my husband would not be on board with that. And sometimes I will agree to something without checking in with him. And then now he's feeling like, okay, so where's my downtime, right? Because for him, he's on. And I'm on too, but that's just my way of being when I'm with my family. So I don't necessarily see that as being any different. But for him, he wants to get back to the whole hotel. So that's sort of like his space, his safe space, and where he can be himself and get some distance. But if I rob him of that, then he really feels that he feels a loss of that. And then that turns into a lack of consideration. And that's something I'm working on. And so since we're both sharing, what it is that we fall short on. That's definitely something that I fall short of, trying to, and it's very important to my husband that, I be loyal to him when I'm out of state, when we're out of our home, that he knows and that I know that, he's very important to me and that he's not going to get replaced by somebody else, just because I'm back in my hometown. And so that's definitely something that I've been, just consciously working on because I think it is the family role and to your partner you're in an adult relationship. When we go home to our families, whether we like it or not, we're our parents' children. And so even though we have adult relationships with our partner, our relationship with our parents are still that parent child relationship. And so whether you intend it or not, they relate to you as their child and that's their perspective. And in many ways we relate to them as being our parents, and yet our spouses are looking at us like, okay, what just happened to my wife, or my husband? Like, what happened here? And so it is something that and I feel sorry for both parties. I feel sorry for my husband that, he's lost his wife. And I feel sorry for myself that I've lost my adulthood. And now I'm managing and trying to navigate both being, my parents' children or my uncle and aunt's niece or nephew. Um, and also being, the adult spouse of a person and the mother of a child. And so it is a lot to sort of keep all those balls in the air. So, I mean, no one comes out of this unscathed, I think. I think we all take a little bit of a hit. And it's just how much of that you can manage and keep yourself intact. Because when you come back from that trip, you're going back to work. And so if you're like already running on zero, then I don't know how that week is going to go. But usually those weeks are pretty tough on the return trip. Would you say that's true?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that I mean, again, it kind of comes back to that anxiety piece of just feeling like all of those pressures and certain things. But yeah, I mean, it definitely, I've mentioned before, like we do a rosary when we leave for a trip, and that's kind of how we like get ourselves in a good headspace to go on a longer road trip and coming back, and that kind of resets us. I mean, we're, a very kind of religious family in a lot of ways. But it definitely, like, I almost have started to build in a day. So like if we're gone like a Wednesday through Sunday, like we leave very early Sunday, so we get back. So I have time to just recoup before Monday morning. If I could come back Saturday, I would. I think my husband, depending on whose family we're visiting, like when we visit his family, he wants to stay the whole time. I'm like, I need like one day where I'm just home and just like kind of like you're like Dan, him and I are probably similar in that way. Like I need a day of just like downtime. Um, to kind of recover from that, which I mean, I think is like, it's an interesting thing. Like I was thinking about as you were talking, like we anticipate and look forward to visiting family, but it does take a lot out of you. And those past dynamics, like you were saying about how you and your brothers kind of tease each other and kind of like these are these are kind of ingrained in us. It's just the way that we interact. And so it's hard to break that or to like shift that. And in some regards we don't want to because that's like part of our culture and our 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 world that we live in. But I think that it does shift over time too and change and morph. And again, kind of reflecting back on this past Christmas, like there was a lot of changes that happened, some great, some disappointing, and it was very hard to maneuver through. um and like this, we're now almost at Easter, and we stayed home for Easter, which is a new thing for us. We're not usually home. So we're kind of starting to create our own traditions and things like that. So I think that things shift, as the years go on. And I do think that it's very difficult to maneuver through knowing what exactly you want that to look like and then trying to counter those habits and kind of traditions that you've had in place.
I mean, for sure, I know that, my family grieves it when I don't come home for the holidays. And, there's a certain amount of leeway because Dan's family is in St. Louis. And so they're in opposite directions. And so either we're going to go to Michigan or we're going to go to St. Louis. And so I think that it's really hard. And if we're not going anywhere, like for our Easter, this year we're not going anywhere, we're staying here. And, I know that my family, I was talking to one of my family members and it was like, oh, what are you guys doing for Easter? And I said, oh, nothing, we're just staying at home. And then there's just like this silence because it's like, well, you could, like, yeah, I could go to Michigan, right? I mean, it would be easy for me to go to Michigan. Easy in the fact that I have the time off to go, but then it's like the mental exhaustion of like trying to plan it and to go there. And so there's always this expectation that if I'm not going to St. Louis for the holiday, that I would automatically go to Michigan. And it just puts a lot of pressure on me to be able to not make them feel unimportant, but at the same time to say, I have a grown adult daughter who now has her own career and her own space. And if she's going to come to my house for Easter, then that's really what I need to do. And because she does, and she's a nurse and she works midnights, like we can't all come to Michigan now because she may only have a couple hours to spare because she may have to go back to work. And so it's like navigating that, and so there's so many layers to that as well. The other thing that I think was an adjustment for Dan is just the fact that, he's like second or third generation German and English, maybe. And I am first generation Indian. So in my family, when we get together, there's usually two menus. There's an Indian menu, and then there is, some non-Indian, whatever it is, appetizer, dessert. side dishes or whatnot. And most of my family, when they get together, even though most of us kids, and I say kids and we're like 50 years old, but like my cousins and all of us, we all only speak English. And so it's the elders, like my uncles and aunts and folks like that, who speak our native language. And so at our dinner table or in the house where, because when you have 40 people at a table, you're not going to be sitting at a table, but like there's just a lot of different language going on. So some parts of the conversation are in our native language. Some of the language is in English. And so it's really hard because Dan doesn't know any of our language. And so I can understand it. All of us kids can understand the language, but we don't necessarily freely speak it. But Dan doesn't understand any of it. So I've tried to be very straightforward with my family to say, we have to speak English because I'm not the only one who's married to a non-Indian. Now there's a lot broader number of people in my family who are married to non-Indians. And so it's like, when it was only Dan, that was one thing. But now we have like 4 or 5 people who are attending these events and don't speak English or don't speak our native language. And so therefore, let's not exclude all of them. And so it becomes a little bit more real when everybody can relate to it in the sense of like if my uncles and aunts now have children who are marrying outside of the Indian culture, and now their son-in-law or daughter-in-law is part of the mix, now you're more considerate of your child and their partner being part of this mix. Whereas, Dan and I have been in this situation for 20 some years. And so it's been a little bit of a transition. But the language and even getting used to the food, I think, is also something that, has created a little bit of stress and adjustment on Dan's part in terms of being able to, really fit in and feel comfortable. Any other thoughts? The article that I referenced does have some solutions for like how to prepare yourself, and you touched upon that a little bit, Alyssa. But before I get into that, I just wanted to know if you had any other conversation before we talk about how to prepare for going back to your hometown.
No, I mean, I'm curious to hear what other ideas there are because I again, we kind of just naturally came up with a game plan. But I would love to hear kind of what they recommend because I think that, as the holidays come up, this is definitely an area that people wanna hear what's the next step.
Yeah. So, basically, it is what you talked about, which is anticipate the anxiety. Like you acknowledge it, you understand that this is like a natural part. I think you try to create some understanding between you and your partner. Like this is a phenomenon, like you and I can go back to our spouses and say, hey, this is not just me. This is a very common experience. And so touch base about it, come up with really a game plan for it. And so, also, the Dr. Albers went on to say, our brain loves to be prepared. So knowing your triggers, sensitive buttons, uncomfortable conversations that may emerge will help to create an emotional armor. Traveling is stressful, so making sure you get quality sleep and are eating well is also going to help you cope more effectively with this anxiety. So I think we always get back to, some just stable, sort of standard kinds of self care kinds of behaviors, eating, sleeping, anticipating, um, going through if there's something is already going to be stressful, if you're going home for a funeral or some kind of a difficulty, understanding that it's going to be an emotional time and preparing everybody for that. And so I think we covered everything that the article speaks to. But once again, I think it just validates for us that this is real and that what we go through is a struggle, and what our partners and our spouses go through is equally a struggle. And I'm sure if we polled our parents, our families, they would say it's a struggle for them as well because, our families are naturally enlarging, whether it's children, whether it's spouses, whether it's, extended family. A lot of people invite, if you're in college, some families invite their child's, roommate to come and spend time, especially if the roommate is from out of the country or is from a different state and they can't go back home. So, like, things just happen where you're accommodating more people. And if you're from a Puerto Rican family, an Indian family, an Italian family, it's like the more the merrier, right? Just come on in. Everybody can just come in. And so that adds to a certain amount of discomfort, especially if you're not an extrovert. And so, definitely for people who are a little bit more timid or need a little bit more time to adjust, that can really create unnecessary or undue stress that other people don't really consider because that's not their personal style. And so it's really important. I've said it many times on the podcast that Dan is more of an introvert. I'm definitely more of an extrovert. And I love talking to people and I enjoy that. Though I've realized now as I've gotten older, it is a lot more exhausting than it was when I was in my 20s. And so I do need to put in some time. And it's one of the best things that Dan ever introduced me to was actually coming home like a day, at least a day in advance, or leaving a day earlier so that we can come back a day earlier from the trip because we both need time to settle back into our routines. It's really wonderful to have a day to do laundry, go grocery shopping so that I'm not incorporating that into my work week. And so there's just been a lot of benefits. It's things that I fought because I wanted to be at home for as long as I could. But it really just adds to the overall week stress. Then now that whole period gets elongated for the first couple of days back. And there's really some value to being able to create a boundary between, your travel time and your return home time. And now we do that with our vacations too, even if we go out of town for nothing to do with my family. If we just go out of on a vacation, we always end up coming at least a day or two before I go back to work so that we both have that time to get some extra sleep or, pick up our dogs from the, borders or get all that stuff done so that we're not rushing around the last 12 hours before we go to bed and come home. So, have you guys, besides what you've already mentioned, Alyssa, are there any other ideas that you guys have incorporated as a way to transition from that, like, vacation time back to real life?
I think we're still working on it, but it was interesting because as we were talking about it, or as you were kind of talking about some of the solutions, I was thinking back to so we just did that mindfulness, and I was thinking, oh, what a good opportunity that would be to utilize mindfulness. So we had a couple of episodes with Lisa, and I'm not gonna say her last name
For right
correct.
now?
Baragna.
Yes.
Okay. So she was on, a bit ago, and we talked about mindfulness and parenting. And she just did a guided meditation with us last night. So uh, we had kind of posted that in our Facebook group, and I got a lot of feedback that it was a really great opportunity to kind of sit with and do mindfulness. Um, and I think everybody hopefully walked away feeling a little bit more relaxed. So I was thinking like that's probably a great option too, and something that you could do, when you're traveling, whether it be in a car, an airplane, or wherever, but just maybe putting in, your headphones and just kind of having that time to decompress, even if it's only 5-10 minutes. So that's what jumped into my mind because I was like, oh, what a and again, I think that there's prayer, rosaries, different ways of other types of kind of meditation. But I think that's probably another opportunity to utilize that in a way that helps you to regroup.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so I think that we can wrap this up. And as Alyssa mentioned, we had a wonderful episode of the guided meditation last night. We had, I think, 6 or 7 people join us. North or South Carolina was represented. I know Ohio was represented. A lot of people from Illinois were represented. So we had a nice turnout. It was a great way. Lisa did review the body scanning technique that she talked about in the meditation mindfulness episode, and so that was really nice to be able to go through that and have her walk us through it. We did record it, so if anybody wants to get a recorded version of that. It's about 30 minutes long. You can just send us an email at thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com, or reach out to Alyssa or myself, and we will be happy. We will need your email address to be able to share that with you, and we're happy to get that. That information is also the best way to get a hold of us. And we're always looking for new ideas, new topics, things that are really top of mind for us women as we're trying to be the best person we can be the best mom, be the best partner, be the best, human being, and also be the best for ourselves and take care of ourselves. And so as we go into the season of spring and renewal and Easter and, resurrection and all of that kind of stuff, hoping for everybody that's listening that you have a wonderful time with your family, and that please continue to listen to us and support us and give us ideas. And we'd love to hear from you soon. So I'll say bye for Alyssa Marie and myself. Until next time, bye bye. Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Deconstructed Woman. If you liked this podcast, please share it with your friends, rate this episode, or subscribe to be notified of all new content. We want to hear from you, our listener. Do you have thoughts on the discussions we're having? Want to share topic suggestions, or want to join us for a topic that you're passionate about? Contact us at our email address, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com.